Hey everybody, welcome to the Fire It Up with CJ show. Today we were talking to Dr. Paul White about this book, The Vibrant Workplace. And Dr. White Paul has been part of our show for, I don't know, a lot. I've been interviewing you a lot. so I'm so excited to have you here again.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back.
So I was thinking, like, how did we even start this? And it was because of the five languages of appreciation in the workplace, which was a riff off of the five love languages, that great body of work. And the premise of, or the question of, how does one show appreciation in the workplace? How can we take what we learned about the five love languages and bring it in the workplace? And we had some videos previous about that. And then we talked about toxic managers as well, and toxic bosses and what to do. And
Right?
now we're kind of going back to our original conversations about recognition, appreciation, and how someone goes about creating a vibrant workplace. So I wanted to first start off with how you define a vibrant workplace.
Yeah. So a vibrant workplace, I tend to use nature as sort of the image. And in fact, when I do training and workshops, I have this lovely image of a grove of trees with the sunlight coming through, and there's grass growing. It's pretty natural looking, but there's a sense of energy. There's a sense of life, of growth, of health. Um, that good things are happening, and so that's there. But the other part about a vibrant workplace is that it's not that everything's perfect, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a vibrant workplace actually is a workplace that can deal with challenges and obstacles rather than getting stuck with it. And that's true
Mm.
in a healthy, natural place too. I mean, there's bugs or fungus or whatever kinds of things that you have to learn how to deal with. And so it's one of those places. I mean, it's sort of like if you walk either into a greenhouse or some place like botanical gardens or whatever. There's just you're sort of overwhelmed with the health and the energy of it. That there are workplaces. They're not a lot, I don't think, but there are workplaces that you walk in and you have a sense, wow, this is a healthy place, and people are there's energy. It's positive energy. And good communication, but they're getting things done. It's not just having fun,
Mm.
and so it's productive. And so, in a nutshell, I think that's sort of what a vibrant workplace looks like when it's functioning well.
Right. And what's interesting is that it's almost like a forest, right? There are
Yeah,
parts, like there can be certain functional areas with great managers. Like when I was at Microsoft, there were a couple of teams that I worked on that were just fabulous teams that kind of clicked along and fit all of that description. And then surrounding it were not so healthy teams. And so
right.
it's about the culture is not necessarily, it's probably, yes, there's the ecosystem of the forest, but then there's also little pockets of the forest that are healthy or
Absolutely.
not.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes it's hard because, so let's say that I've had a couple of instances of people who they have like a really energized area that they run, or they feel like their area is energized, but everything
Right.
around them is kind of toxic. Um, how does one kind of protect that vibrant workplace when they're surrounded by, you call them moss and bugs,
Yeah.
algae?
Yeah, it's about healthy boundaries. And, a friend of mine, Henry Cloud, has written a great book on, he and John Townsend on boundaries. And what's interesting about boundaries, lots of times when we talk about it sort of in the popular context, we think about, setting a wall. But boundaries actually in nature are permeable.
Mm,
They both protect the organism, but they also allow resources in. And so
mm,
a healthy organism has boundaries that keep out the bad stuff and let in the good stuff, and also get out the bad stuff, the waste or whatever, as needed. And so, I think it's having a good identity as a group that this is our team and this is what we do, and knowing what is part of who we are. And for me, that's values. I mean, the things that are important to us that drive how we make decisions on how we handle a complaining customer, or an order that's gone bad, or a vendor that doesn't fulfill their responsibility. So your values are not, and I used to work, with family businesses and small businesses and help them create mission statements, all that kind of stuff. Uh, And usually they're not worth a whole lot, except for what they really should be used for as a filter for decision making, because that's what your values
Mm,
are. It's both prioritizing and this is what's important. And so if a customer complains, it's more important to us to serve the customer well rather than make money on that transaction. And so it gives you a framework for making decisions in daily life, and that's really what it should do. And so
mhm,
you have to work at that with your team. And I'm a small business owner. I got 5 staff members, and so try to help them understand this is how we go about stuff. This is what's important to us, and then we talk through challenging situations and figure out, okay, what should this look like? Because it's not like you give everything away either, right? I mean,
mhm.
I have lots of organizations that say, we're poor, not for profit, and can you give us stuff? Well, uh, the cost of one of our inventories to find out how people want to be shown appreciation is a cost about 2 Starbucks coffees, and so
Right,
if you can, you know if it's important to you, you can forego that for a week or so and make
right.
it happen.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that, part of when you feel like, all right, there's goodness here and there's surrounded by some just maybe dysfunction, it's getting clear about who you are and what you stand for through looking at your values and your priorities. And then also, I think that the two key things that you mentioned, which I think we often neglect, is like how we make decisions and how we deal with things when are tough. If you have kind of a process or operating guidance or guidelines on what happens with those two things, that's huge. It probably eliminates a whole bunch of dysfunction that happens within a work group. And I just met with a small 2 people team that works very closely, and it was exactly doing that, like trying to understand their perspective on what the dysfunction was, and then coming up and discussing, well, what do we do? What do we know about the past and what's caused the dysfunction? Now, what kind of processes and things can we do to prevent it? And and the vast majority of things were just misunderstandings and judgments. That was
Hmm.
basically 90% of what was going wrong.
Yeah,
And all they needed to do was talk, and a lot of those misunderstanding and judgments would have been gone.
yeah. Talk and listen, right, and understand.
Yeah,
Um, and it ties into the vibrant workplace in
yeah.
that the vibrant workplace, the book, is really sort of the culmination of 9 years of my working with organizations to help try to implement the 5 languages of appreciation and communicate authentic appreciation. And I identified the 10 most common obstacles that we encountered because when
Hmm.
you try to change something, either a person or a group or whatever, you're always going to hit some bumps in the road or
Hmm.
barriers. And so, what were those and how do you get past them? And,
Right,
one of them is that ties into this is like when things don't go right. So, when you have a low performer, I mean, somebody that's not doing what they do, you show appreciation or not,
right,
and sort of that whole performance issue, and and what do you do with just really tough people to get along with? What do you do when managers just don't get it? They're just about the numbers, and it's just like just crank. I don't care how people feel. Just I want to see the green at the top, and pushbacks from supervisors and that kind of stuff. So that's the book is, and we have a video training course that we developed that goes along with it that helps teams sort of work through that as they're trying to create a more positive workplace, but they're hitting roadblocks.
okay. So let's actually tackle some of the ones that let's actually I want to talk about slightly a bigger a touch base on something we had talked about before, which is
Okay.
the interrelationship between recognition, appreciation, and performance. And then yeah, let's start there just so we can come go through some basics, and then I want to talk about the obstacles that you talk about in your book.
Sure, cool. So, employee recognition has been around for quite a while, at least a few decades, and actually has some fairly good research behind it that when people are recognized for good performance and reaching goals and so forth, that those behaviors at least continue, if not improve. And
Mm.
it's used a lot in sales, but it's beyond that. I mean, it's the receptionist answering the phone with a cheerful voice and making sure they get to the right person and all that kind of stuff. And so what happened is that there's some good research about how companies who implement that do well financially. Well, this is my read on it. The C-suite people, including the CFOs, got a hold of that and said, "Man, this is great. We can increase your profitability or productivity by 6% or whatever. Um, so let's do that." And
And
that's
it's
fine.
free, you know. The
But
compliment's free.
the problem is that like any good thing, it can be overused and misused, right? And so what happened is then they started to try to make it the deal, and it was all about productivity. And then people started to react to that, that, hey, I'm more than just a producer, I'm a person. And they just felt like a work unit, and a sort of a box on the Excel spreadsheet.
Right.
And that, along with some other changes that happened when we sort of came along about talking about appreciation, they started to try to use recognition to show appreciation to individuals, and that absolutely doesn't work because it wasn't designed to do that.
Mm.
Um, and so then people felt like, well, this they don't really give a rip about me. They just want better performance, and they don't really know me, and it all came back to the work kind of thing. And so I just try to help differentiate that recognition, when designed well and implemented well, can be a good thing in helping uh, support and reward the kinds of positive behaviors and results you want. But it's not designed to help individuals feel valued, in other ways. And so actually, we've come to a point where we see that both can really work together well. And appreciation, as we define it, is really about the person, because there are times, I think, all of us aren't at the top of our game, performance wise, whether it's days or weeks or something else going on in our life. We have lives outside of work, right? We have family, whether it's kids, whether it's parents that we're having to start to take care of. We have health issues, maybe, our significant relationship, other kinds of stressors, and those impact our work life. And it's helpful to pay attention to that,
Mm.
and if you don't, and it's like, how come
Mm.
your numbers are down? What's up?
Oh.
And you don't, either don't know or you don't really care that they're having to deal with their senior parents on the weekends and trying to find a place for them to live, and it's taking time and energy. We feel like showing appreciation for people, and it can be work related, that you value what they do and so forth, but it's not only that, because part of what we've sort of uncovered is that, and I'm a psychologist, and we sort of emphasize or celebrate the obvious. So here's one, and that is people have positive characteristics that aren't related to performance. I mean, do you like to work with cheerful people or grumpy people? I mean,
Right.
it may not improve their performance, or do you like to work with people who are sort of calm in a tense conflict, or you like people who ramp it up and are dramatic? I mean, it may not show on their performance sheet, but or people that don't complain and grumble all the time versus somebody who does.
Yep.
And so there's non-performance kinds of behaviors and characteristics, and there's even non-work characteristics. And one of the things I had to sort of think about and dig out is that the question was, well, what do you do if you don't appreciate somebody?
Right.
Well, it's sort of like getting in an argument with, your significant other, and they're mad, and you say, well, just get over it.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't help. The same thing, just trying to create appreciation,
Right.
that doesn't work. And what I saw is that it really comes from valuing a person. Okay, and if you can discover things that you value about that person, then you can appreciate that part of them.
Mm.
And so it's not always about work, right? Maybe somebody is not their best worker and they're still sort of trying to get it together, but they're training for a half marathon. You can say, "Man, I'm so impressed you've got the
Mm.
personal discipline to do that. That's just cool." Or a single mother who's raising her kids, really committed to her kids, and you say, "Man, Janice, I'm just blown away about how committed you are to your kids and how much you give to them." And I just think that's cool. And it's not about work, right? But it's about them. Do you think that's going to create a positive connection and a little bit of, they'd be maybe be willing to listen to some corrective feedback? Absolutely. And so
Uh,
for us, it's not just performance, it's but about the person. It includes the performance, it can, but that's where. And the other part is it's not just top down, right? Recognition is pretty organizational. I mean, it's from either management or supervisors
right.
down, which is fine. But appreciation can be both top down. It can be bottom up. You're the person that report to you can
Yeah,
appreciate.
bosses like to be appreciated too.
Absolutely. And the part that we find really powerful is for colleagues, to involve colleagues in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Because one, we don't want the managers to shoulder all the responsibility. Secondly, it empowers people to make a difference in their daily life. If they think I'm working in a negative place, well, it's, hey, part of this is on you, that, you can show encouragement and appreciation to other people. It doesn't have to just come from, above. So
Yeah.
it's fun. And
Yeah. Yeah, I like it.
it,
So I think what's interesting to me is, so I'm trying to map this to things that I've observed. So there's recognition programs where when I look at when I've seen been in corporations, it's like so and so hit when above and beyond their sales goal, they're the top performer and they're going to get this trip to Hawaii. So there's that kind of recognition
right.
program, and what I'm hearing from a kind of a recap is the stats show that there will be an increase in productivity. It sounds like in the 6% range if there are recognition programs. People generally go like, okay, let's actually buy some little trips to Hawaii, and like a good job, and high five, like that's and that's kind of like that's not
Yeah.
enough because that's kind of recognizing what the person has done for the company and their performance, where what you're delineating is more like recognizing who they are as a person and the qualities that they bring, whether it's about work or not about work. Like the
Right.
example, like, wow, I'm just the amount of discipline that you have to do a marathon is really just amazing to me, that you run every day for like 15
Right.
miles and you're training. So it's all those kinds of things. And like, I wish you'd bring that to work. But no, it's basically
Right.
recognizing who they are as a person, because then there's a personal connection, because they feel like you really understand them, including some of the things that I think we don't do, which is I literally have heard someone say to me, yeah, I told my boss that, I'm pregnant, and the person's like, well, we still expect you to perform. Or no, actually,
Wow.
no, no, this was what the person said. I'm being laid off. And my boss said, but we're paying you for 3 months, so we expect you to perform just like you did before. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, what? So,
Yeah.
so she quoted
Yeah.
that to me, and I was like, mm-hmm, you
Well,
know?
yeah, and let me give you a little bit of different wording, just because sometimes, how we talk about things makes a difference. So,
Yeah.
so if we sort of keep recognition to performance
Hmm.
and appreciation for
Who you're
that plus
being.
other things, I think a word is to affirm them, that we're affirming
Uh,
that we see this, because that way, recognizing in a lot of people, it's sort of like public, it's like,
yes.
whereas this is, and the other thing that we know from the five languages of appreciation is that not everybody feels affirmed or appreciated through words, right? So
Mm,
that's where the other languages come in as far as quality time, spending time with them either individually or as a small group, acts of service when they're sort of behind pushing for a project, dig in and help them out a little bit, or do something that lightens the load so they can keep going.
I'm going to give
Tangible,
examples like giving them bagels in the morning because you know that they love bagels as an act
yeah,
of service, right? Or can
yeah,
I get you
and
coffee? And
yeah,
and then the gifts. What
or
were and the one
or
was
or or you know cover their calls so they can keep focused on a project.
right,
The bagels and coffee, it could be active service, but it's also a tangible gift,
right,
right? I mean,
okay,
and especially if you get the kind that they like,
right.
it's about being personal versus I was dealing with a large group, and one of the managers said, "Well, we give them, Amazon uh, gift cards, which is," and I affirmed that. I
Better
said,
than
"That's good,
not, but
better
not
than not,
personal.
but it'd be better if you find out that they like music, get them an iTunes gift card, or if they
Hmm.
like books, get them a Barnes and Noble one, or whatever, so that there's a personal element about it." And
Hmm.
so, The other thing about the recognition part is that we know on the performance level who gets recognized. Well, it's usually the top 10 or 15%, right? And does that group change? Not much. It's usually the same top of 10 or 15. So then you have, let's say if you got your low performers down here and we need to manage those, but you got this big group in the middle of about
Mm-hmm.
50, 60%. They're not getting the recognition for performance. They're getting butkus. I mean, nothing,
Right.
I mean, and so, and you need them to hang in there, and they need encouragement, and they need to know that you value and appreciate them. Otherwise, they're the group. We have research shows 79% of the people that leave voluntarily cite a lack of appreciation as one of the main reasons for leaving. And
Mm.
so, if you, especially as finding good employees gets tighter and tighter, you don't want to lose people, and so you want to be able to show appreciation to them, even if they aren't, the stars, but they're solid team members, and you value them.
Right. And then is appreciation different than encouragement?
Mm. Great question. For me, and again, this is sort of how I frame it. For me, appreciation is about the past, that I value and appreciate what you've done or demonstrated. Encouragement is about the present and future. The actions look the same. You may still, get them their favorite Starbucks coffee or whatever, but it's more that, hey, hang in there. I know you're working on this project and you've hit some roadblocks and you're working through it, keep going. Or, it's like, hey, I really think you're moving in the right direction here. I want you to know that I value and appreciate. So to me, encouragement is about present and the future, and appreciation's about the past, recent past, hopefully.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And I work with a product called Predictive Index, and one of the things for encouragement and appreciation is so important. And for some people, encouragement is huge. Like they
Mm-hmm.
just need the the you can do it, and I really appreciate what you're doing, and I know you're going to do a great job. Like that kind of thing makes a huge
Yeah.
difference. So I want to talk about some of the obstacles for the culture of appreciation. We talked about one of them. So it could be that you have someone who's like a little dark spot in your group. They're always interrupting, they're always complaining. I was just joking with a friend. We were talking about a meeting that we were in, and we were talking about business development. And I don't recall this, but he said that every time the teacher would mention, like, here's an inspirational idea, the person would be like, yeah, but what about this thing? I've
Yeah.
seen this go wrong 5 or 6 times, and I don't remember, but he said that he recurrently did that over and over again. I don't remember, but you always have these little dark spot, kind of
Yeah. Black
negative
holes
people, black
sometimes. Yeah.
holes. So what do you do with these black holes that are creating a negative, not vibrant workplace?
Usually it's about an interaction. It's not just an individual. So it's, pockets of little groups that are negative and complaining, and whether it's a department or whatever. And what I found is that it's important not to engage in the negativity, whether that's that you're part of the conversation and it turns negative. One of the best things to do is just sort of excuse yourself and say, hey, I'll catch you guys later. You don't have to call them out. You don't have to say, you guys are so negative.
Right.
But just, just say, hey, I'll catch you later. And over time, they're going to get the message that you don't want to be a part of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you may become a target. So what? I mean, you're bigger than that. And so uh, that's helpful because you don't need fuel on the fire, to keep it going. And after a while, if there's no more fuel, it sort of dies out.
Mm.
The other part is if you just do or say something positive, and it doesn't have to be about that situation, it's sort of like throwing water on a fire. I mean, it just sort of douses it. It's like, and you can be, hey, I really enjoyed the weather here lately, haven't you? It's been sort of cool. Or how about them Warriors,
Right.
or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be work related. I think too often we get in the work world, we think we've got to talk and do stuff about work to change the dynamics of the relationships. That's not true. I mean, it's helpful if you can also call positive things that, hey, we got a big sale in I saw the other day, or whatever it is. But just those two simple things,
So this is
especially,
in scenarios where it's a coworker who's just kind of an energy suck, right? And so what I'm
yeah,
hearing is just boundaries. Like it's like I hear you, and like let's you actually change the energy of it, or
Yeah.
basically put a boundary and walk away because it's like, I don't want to engage. So that's a scenario of co-workers, right?
Right.
Okay.
But also within a department, if you can get one or two colleagues to join you in sort of stamping out the negativity, there's a lot of power in that. I mean, versus you just being sort of, what we used to call Johnny One Note. I mean, it's like,
Right.
oh, they're so cheerful. They always say this stuff.
Right.
Um, and one of the things I find is that people misunderstand culture. Okay, when you talk about we need to change our workplace culture, okay? They view it as external. It's like they're not saying we need to change our workplace. They're saying you need to change. They're saying it to somebody else, right? But that's not what culture is. Culture is the accumulation of thousands of interactions between individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way you change culture is you change individual interactions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, the more individuals that are participate, the more interactions, then it starts to grow and change more. But it's not external; it's you. So you can't change. Let's say I don't care. You work in a big company. You can't change the whole place, but you can start to change the interactions with your daily life colleagues and supervisors and direct reports and whomever. I mean, you can have an influence about how much negativity you're going to participate in or not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So then, what do you do? So I had one gal who, she was in a meeting, and every time this person would point out, and I think he did it out of a spirit of helping, but it's like, hey, we're introducing this new program here, and he'd be like, oh, that will never work. Here's the reason why it never works, and then he's like, well, and also, and then he would just spew hatred out to people, like, because Sally never executes on the part that she needs to execute on, and like the people over in the other department, so he's just like basically just this negative spewing of any time an idea came, he'd swap it down and give 10 reasons on why it didn't come. What would you do in those cases? You're managing a person. I get the coworker case where you kind of shield yourself, or what would you do
Okay.
if you were a manager in those kind of situations in a meeting or generally speaking?
One of the tools I use a lot is silence. And that a little bit of silence after somebody spouts off something negative or stupid sends a little bit of a message.
Mm,
Uh, it can be different messages. It can be, okay, I'm thinking about this. I'm not just going to immediately react. Secondly, it's like, are you sure that's what you want to communicate? Um, and another message is, I'm not in total agreement about that. I mean, just a pause. It could be a five, I don't know, could maybe a 3 second pause. It doesn't have to be long. But then sometimes it depends on the person, the relationship. Sometimes you say, I don't know, call person Tony. Tony, you got some points. There's some challenges here. I agree. And so you affirm them. You don't just totally, come back at them. But then, but then you say, I'm open to hear suggestions, but if we don't do anything, that doesn't solve the problem, right?
mm-hmm.
So we need to do something or quit doing something. So this seems to me to be the best alternative right now, but we can try to figure out how to make it better. So, you don't want to get into this shooting
Yeah.
cannonballs back and forth, so you affirm and you sort of say, yeah, okay, I hear you. But then it's like, let's get back to reality. We got to solve the problem. And so I wouldn't necessarily directly ask them, so do you have a better solution? Because if they give one and you don't like it, then you're sort of stuck. So if you want this one, you say, let's see how we can make this work and maybe get past some of those challenges.
Right. And how
That's
about well, Sally never does her part, so okay, I can try this alternative, Paul, but it will never work if Sally never executes on her problem in the program department.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and you can say, hey, I appreciate the feedback and let me think about how to deal with that. But yeah, that's an issue. We'll have to make sure that everybody is engaged and involved, and I'll have to think on it.
okay.
The other thing is time is a wonderful thing in that
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to answer the issues or resolve it right there. It's like, you affirm it and say, let me think on it. And if you say, I can get back to you, you have to. But or if you just say, think on it, they don't know whether you
Right.
did or not. But
You did think about it for those 2 seconds, and then you left. So that was
nanosecond
just
in
so
there.
stupid. Next.
Or like I was in a meeting once and somebody offered a suggestion and literally the leader said, "Well, does anybody have a good idea?" You know, I mean, so yeah.
Interesting. So the other thing that I've heard in terms of negativity is where the you know the no one wants to say what they're really thinking, so they just kind of sit back and kind of like they kind of so and then they talk behind the person's back. Oh, I
Right.
think it was ridiculous what Sally recommended. Um,
Right.
what are some good ways
To me,
when
that's a cultural issue because in our research on toxic workplaces, one of the core issues is indirect communication.
mm,
If you want to screw up a system, just design a bunch of indirect communication going around people, not talking directly, because then you can't dialogue, you can't
mm,
problem solve together, and that's where you shoot the messenger and all that kind of stuff. So part of that is in my it's just like you just sort of you're like a I don't know, a, a hunter with hound dogs, and you're hunting out that indirect stuff, and you're just stamping it out because it goes nowhere good. Now there are ways and times and places where direct communication can be challenging because of who and the message, but even so, I think there's ways to handle it better than the indirect and so I've worked with leaders that they say, if you come to me with a problem and it's about somebody else, if you haven't talked to them yet, our conversation's not going any further until you have.
hmm
Okay. And so you just don't listen to the stuff. You don't give them advice. You just say, it's between you and them. Go talk to them about it.
right. Yeah, that actually seems like a really healthy way of dealing with it. Okay, so we've hit every single negativity thing that I've ever seen. Like gossip, black hole, meeting canner, idea crusher. I don't know if I'm
Actually,
missing anyone else. Am I missing
I got
anyone
to
else?
tell you, it's amazing to me because for some reason it doesn't get me, but I hear a lot from leaders about how tough gossip is to deal with and how frequent it is. I mean, it's more frequent than I seem to know about or hear about. I guess I'm clueless
You're the
about it, or
consultant, right? They're not going to gossip with
well,
you.
but even
They're
this,
gossiping about you, Paul.
yeah, I know. So that's an interesting one. But again, it's indirect stuff, and it's about them usually personally. Um, so I don't know. I'm still thinking on that how to deal with gossip. I
Yeah.
don't think I have a good answer to that yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I talked to this one person once, and she had said, gossip is healthy to the extent it helps you work through something, right? So it's like what I'm really realizing is I'm mad at her because she never listens to me, blah blah blah. But
Sure.
the problem with gossip is it just goes that direction, and the person's like, yeah, she never listens to me either, and
Hmm.
then it doesn't go anywhere, right? There isn't a kind of, well, what would you do?
Yeah.
That's where I come in as a coach. I'll
Yeah.
say, so what would you want her to do so she would listen? Have you talked to her about her listening skills? No. It's like, okay, well, would you want
Why
to?
not?
Would you
Yeah.
change things? And they're like, well, I don't know because she would never listen to me even asking her. It's like, well, if you don't try, you won't know. so those are the kinds of things that it's interesting because I don't know the answer either because they're usually I get one-on-one interactions of people who are just so fed up with people, but oftentimes they don't really figure out what they own of the problem.
The part because I deal with leaders in family businesses especially, and
Oh, that's going to be a lot of
sometimes
that.
you get situations where you have choice A that has I can handle it this way, A, and there's maybe some positives, but there's these negatives. I got choice B, it's got maybe a positive and these negatives, and I don't like either of those. So I'm going to go to F, which is the fantasy choice, and everything's going to be okay. And that's either not doing it or waiting or whatever. And I'm saying, sometimes you have choices that you don't like, and so you have to figure out. So they don't want to talk to them because they may get mad at them or repercussions or whatever. It's like, okay, I understand that, but which one can you live with more, or you really don't want to go there? I mean, it's like I understand you don't like either of these, but it's like broccoli
Right.
or Brussels sprouts, right?
Right.
So
Yes.
and help them make the choices. I don't like green vegetables,
I see
bitter
that.
ones. Anyway,
Lemon, lime, or something else. I see.
right.
So yeah. Going back to obstacles for showing appreciation,
Yeah.
one thing that I see all the time now, especially in the world of the internet, is this kind of chronic busyness. Oh, I can't do it. I've just got too much. I don't know. Well, can you call me then? I only have 5 minutes. Can I call you when I'm actually walking in between meetings? Like there's so
Right.
like how are you supposed to be authentic if you don't even have time? It's like I don't have time to be authentic.
Right.
I don't
Right.
have time to give appreciation. I can't even. Who appreciates me?
Yeah, I was just asked to give a TED type talk to the closing ceremonies of the Recognition Professionals International Conference, and I spoke about busyness. That I think busyness is probably one of the greatest um, threats, really, to a healthy workplace.
Mm,
And because when I talk to groups and work with groups, and I ask them, okay, why don't you think appreciation is shown more? They'll say, well, we don't know how or whatever. But the number one is we're just too busy.
yeah, don't
Okay,
have
and
time.
don't have time, and I understand that, but that's a cultural issue, really. I mean, it's outside of the workplace. It's not like we're busy at work and then we're not busy outside of work, right? I mean, busy people have busy lives, and so it's about how we think about life, and that everything has to be done to the max. There was a great book a number of years ago by a guy named Dr. Richard Swinson on margin. That
Mm-hmm,
we need to build margin into our lives, whether that's
mm-hmm.
financial when your car breaks down or you're sick for a while or whatever, you need to build margin of time if you hit traffic or if the printer copier isn't working right. And we fill everything up, and so we don't have any margin. And I think we have to sort of dial that back and be okay with, not living to the max. It's an image thing. I mean, we really are living to the max if we're living fully and contently and peacefully rather than, frantically. And one of the things that I see, this is a real practical one about busyness, is that I see repeatedly people when they're working together on a project with somebody and they need to get something back from them, whether it's a report or whatever, that they tighten the time frame more than is necessary. They need it on Wednesday, but they say they need it Monday. Okay.
Right.
Well, that reduces 2 days of resources. That increases the stress, decreases the amount of time. And so now you have less time to get this job done. And sometimes I mean, there's different reasons, and you can manage whether you don't trust that person, whether it just would be nicer for you, whatever. And so I believe, and I try to practice this. It's like, I would like it by Wednesday, but or let's say Monday, but my drop dead date is end of day Wednesday because I can't get done what I need to after that. But I consistently see people say, well, we need it by so and so. Well, do you really need it by then? No. And it just multiplies and increases the stress in the workplace
Yeah.
unnecessarily.
Yeah. I think that that's absolutely true. So the, so basically, the problem is that the margins that we had used to happen as a result of driving in the car, walking to a place, but now we have a phone that we can squeeze in those in between times as work times, and so I think that
Yeah.
the lack of space, or we actually have the technology to fill the space,
Yep.
and when push comes to shove, we always know we have those margins that we can play around with, and I think that that is the hardest thing, right? Because you have the
Hmm.
technology, whereas before we didn't have the technology. When we were waiting in line for lunch, we couldn't look at our phone and read the email that the person just sent, right? So there's almost this, it's almost our minds go into this kind of chronic, like no space at all in our minds.
Yeah, and I think if I think fear drives a lot of busyness that we're afraid whether it's the fear of missing out, but or the fear of other people going to get ahead. If for those of us who are alive and adults, around 9/11, if you remember the weeks after that, life slowed down significantly. Why? Partly, I mean, there's some security stuff, but it was largely people said, "Hey, we're at risk here. I'm going to spend time with my family. I'm not going
Mm,
to go do X, Y, or Z, all these activities." We really filter out a lot of sort of secondary to tertiary kinds of activities, and just said, hey, I'm just going to chill and stay at home, spend time with my kids or whatever it was. And that happens when you have significant events in your life, whether it's a health
Right.
event or whatever, and you start to say, you know, yeah, I should maybe go to this, but if I don't,
No
I'm
one's
going to
going to
spend,
die, right?
nobody's going to die. And sometimes I think we drive ourselves out of fear for the future versus just living in the present.
Yeah.
I know I do. I struggle with that.
Yeah, me too. All right, I know that you just conducted some really research on remote employees, and I don't know if we have enough time. We have about 5 or 6 minutes. Is that enough time to give us kind of
So
your recap
we
on
can,
it?
yeah, I can at least introduce it. So, we have this inventory, the Motivating by Appreciation inventory. It's online, takes 10 minutes to take. It identifies people's primary ways that they like to be shown appreciation in the 5 languages, actually the 4. We don't include physical touch in it. And then also the specific actions within their primary language, whether it's time or words or whatever. And so in 2014, in response to needs identified from our customers, we created an alternative version for long distance work relationships. Because the question was, okay, so my language is quality time, or uh, my colleagues is, but they work in a different state or
Yeah.
country. How do I spend quality time? How do I do acts of service in a remote kind of way? So we created this inventory that the actions are very specific to remote kinds of work relationships. So we um, decided to say, well, because remote workers are increasing incredibly. I mean,
Yeah.
it's almost fivefold in the last 10 years. And 90% of people say they'd like to work remotely at least part time. So we then took, okay, people that work in face to face relationships, how do they say they want to be appreciated, and people who work in remote
Mm-hmm.
work relationships. And what we found is that, first of all, it's largely the same. I mean, the same pattern. Words are the top, time is the next, acts of service, and then tangible gifts
Mm-hmm.
is least. But um, that time, quality time with people that you work with, really rose. I mean, from 35 to 45%, and words dropped. I'd say that 25 to 35%, words dropped from 45 to 35, or right in there. So time and word is about the same for remote workers. And specifically, we then did some follow-up polling and said, okay, what does that look like practically? 3 big things came up. One is use video conferencing to connect with them
Mm-hmm.
versus just
Phone.
email,
Yeah.
phone. Okay, because the facial connection and expressions and all that make a difference and make them feel like they're more connected. Secondly, to include them virtually in team meetings that don't just have team meetings without them when it's appropriate, for them to be
Mm-hmm.
involved. And then third, and I'm blanking on it, is, hang on, got to look at, um, I just did a webinar on it yesterday. Why am I forgetting? That you've got to build time to talk about personal stuff. Because in long distance relationships, you don't have those chance encounters to and from, the parking lot or in
Water
the
cooler. Yeah.
yeah. And so if you don't structure those, they don't happen. And so you either have to set up a call, video call, or 15 minutes before a meeting, 15 minutes afterwards, or whatever. And that it's not just catching up on work, but it's personal chat time about what they did this weekend. How about the Warriors? Whatever. And that those are really important sort of behaviors and habits that if you do the video, if you include them in the team meetings, and if you check in and have some personal chat time, things are going to go quite a bit better for them as far as feeling valued and appreciated
Mm.
versus not.
Yeah, I went with the one group that I consulted with. They had this great idea, and I wish I could remember. It's called like MOOPs or something like that. It's like, what is your like, give us a kind of how are you spiritually, mentally, physically, and I think and there's something,
Occupationally
I
or
can't
something?
remember. I can't remember,
Okay.
but it's that kind of thing. And it's like spiritually, I'm, 4 out of 5, work wise, I'm, a 3 out of 5 because I can't seem to land, this particular client. Personal, I am a 1 out of 5 because, my son, I'm just having problems with at work. So that's kind of what's going on. But that was a way, going back to what you're talking about, appreciation, that you could really appreciate what was happening to that person holistically, not just like, where's the project or if you landed the whatever deal. It's
Right.
where are you, and physically, actually, I've been having all these back problems and I've been going to the doctor because I can't seem to get rid of this chronic pain. So then, like, it's like, okay, like if I gave you an update like that took like 2 minutes, and what CJ's, that's not true for me, but what the
Yeah, yeah,
world
I
is
got it.
going on for me. And I thought
Yeah.
that was actually a brilliant way to do that kind of water cooler thing, or, people can
And
hang out
provide a little
later.
structure to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting way. Do you have any other thoughts about how people can create that? Because when I've talked to people about that, they're like, well, you can sit at the water cooler and hang out with people because there's this water cooler, electronic virtual water cooler where people hang out. And it's like,
Yeah.
people are like,
Here,
I'm not going to
yeah.
do that. So, what are ways that people can kind of,
So
yeah,
the biggest, the,
productively
the
talk?
main lesson was you've got to be more proactive in relationships with remote employees than you do in face to face to keep connected, to be able to communicate appreciation um, in ways that are meaningful to them. And so, yeah, you can hang out at the water cooler, but the chances are of your team members really showing up, I think, is
Yeah,
low
they don't.
unless you got a habit of showing up at the same time every day, which could be cool. But you really have to think about it, and a lot of us are visually cued, and so if that could include maybe having a little photo of them on your computer, so that if you see them, say, hey, I should just ping, Janice and see how she's doing. Because if you don't see it, you don't think about them. The
Yeah.
whole outside out of mind kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see the idea of office hours where you're like at 3 to 4 every afternoon. Your boss is like, you're the boss. I have office hours 3 to 4. Anyone can show up. I can just sit there and be by myself, but I'll have office hours so that you can bring in work issues, talk about whatever. Like I can see that maybe working too, where they're just face to
Hmm.
face sitting in a meeting. But it's hard because, like, I'm thinking about this one person who has like 6 employees, or maybe he's like 7, I don't know, 10 employees, most of which are remote. It's hard to each time have a face-to-face communication where
Right.
instead of email. But I think it's like if
Oh
you
yeah, not every
could,
time.
yeah, like just to have as many as you could face-to-face interactions. That makes sense to me. Fantastic. We didn't hit all the obstacles.
That's all right.
So, anyways, we hit some biggies. There's still some more, and you can uh, find out more from this book, The Vibrant Workplace. We've been talking to Dr. Paul White of Overcoming the Obstacles to Building a Culture of Appreciation. Thank you so much.
Sure, my pleasure, CJ. Thanks for having me.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show, and love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show, or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.